They say college years are meant to shape your future. But for some, those years reveal a darker side of reality, one that can't be explained by any textbook. I'm a paranormal investigator, and these 3 cases from America's most haunted universities still keep me awake at night. What I discovered there changed not just my career, but everything I believed about the boundary between life and death. Story: Year 1, The 9 Who Never Left. Kenyon College story. I received the call on a cold February morning in 2023. Kenyon College's administration was desperate. The incidents in Old Kenyon Hall had become too frequent to ignore. 9 students had died there in a devastating fire in 1949, and lately their presence seemed stronger than ever. "The fire alarms keep going off," the dean told me, "but there's never any fire, and the screaming at night has to stop." I arrived during winter break when the building was empty. Old Kenyon Hall stood like a Gothic sentinel against the gray Ohio sky, its stone walls holding 74 years of tragedy. The moment I stepped inside, I knew this case would be different. The air felt heavy, thick with more than just winter cold. My equipment started malfunctioning immediately. Batteries draining, cameras shutting off, EMF meters spiking to impossible levels. But what struck me most was the smell. Faint, but unmistakable traces of smoke, even though no fire had burned here in decades. In the main hallway, I set up my first camera. That's when I heard it. Footsteps above me, running, despite the building being locked and empty. Then came the banging, like someone desperately trying to break down a door. I raced upstairs, following the sounds. They led me to room 402, exactly where the fire had started in 1949. The door was ice cold to the touch, despite the building's heating being on full blast. When I opened it, my breath caught in my throat. The room was exactly as it had been that night. Not the modern renovation, but the old room, with period-correct furniture and decorations. 9 shadows stood around the room, some by the windows, others huddled in corners. As I watched, frozen, they began to move, acting out their final moments. One shadow ran to the door, then back to the window. Another seemed to be trying to break the glass. Then the shadows noticed me. They turned, simultaneously, and the temperature plummeted. My camera's screen showed 9 distinct human figures. But through my own eyes, I only saw darkness where they stood. One stepped forward, and a voice, barely a whisper, said, "Help us out." The fire alarm erupted into life, screaming through the building. Smoke began pouring from under the door, but when I yanked it open, the hallway was clear. Back in the room, everything was modern again. No shadows, no period furniture, no smoke. But on my camera's playback, I caught something chilling. In the corner of the room, numbers were being scratched into the wall. 2/27/1949, the date of the fire. Below it, fresh scratches appeared. Not our time, not our choice, not our fault. Over the next week, I documented over 50 distinct paranormal events. Fire alarms triggering at 4:27 a.m., the exact time the fire was discovered. Students' belongings being moved to form escape routes to windows. And most disturbing, 9 distinct voices captured on audio, each telling their story of that night. The final recording, captured in the building's basement, still haunts me. 9 voices, in perfect unison. We stay to warn, we stay to protect, we stay until no one else burns. Next story. I thought Kenyon would be the most intense case of my career. I was wrong. Notre Dame's Washington Hall held something darker, more personal. It started with reports of music late at night, a violin playing from the empty stage. Then props began moving between scenes during performances. But when students reported seeing a man in period workman's clothes walking on the ceiling, the university called me in. The steeplejack, James McGuire, had fallen to his death in 1886 while working on the building. The official record said it was an accident. The evidence I found suggested otherwise. My first night in Washington Hall was quiet, almost disappointingly so. Then, at exactly midnight, it started. Footsteps, clear as day, walking across the stage. I followed the sound, but the stage was empty. The footsteps continued, up the wall, across the ceiling, down the other side. Something fell from the rafters, an ancient leather wallet. Inside, I found a weathered letter dated 1886, written in faded ink. They say it was an accident. They lie. Find the truth. The next 3 nights revealed a pattern. The footsteps would start at midnight, always the same route. But they were getting closer, and with them came the violin music, a mournful Irish tune that the record showed was played at McGuire's funeral. On the 4th night, I set up a ladder to check the rafters where the wallet fell. Halfway up, the temperature dropped dramatically. The violin music started, but this time, it wasn't distant. It was right behind me. I turned slowly. There he stood on the stage, James McGuire, still in his work clothes, violin in hand. His face was clear as day, except for his eyes. They were empty, black voids. He lifted the violin and played a single piercing note. The ladder shook violently. I looked down. The floor was 20 feet below, but I was only on the 10th rung. Somehow the ladder had extended impossibly upward. McGuire's ghost smiled. Not a friendly smile, but one of grim satisfaction. "Now you understand," he said, his voice echoing strangely. "Sometimes we fall. Sometimes we're pushed." The ladder began to tilt. In desperation, I grabbed a rafter. When I pulled myself up, the ladder and McGuire were gone. But scratched into the wooden beam were names, 5 of them. All former university employees who had died in accidents between 1880 and 1886. Further research revealed a dark truth. All 5 had been investigating financial irregularities in the building's construction. McGuire had been the last, and after his death, the investigation was closed. The haunting continues, but I understand it now. Every night, McGuire walks his last path, playing his violin, not to frighten, but to remind. Some secrets refuse to stay buried, even after 137 years. Last story. If you enjoy spooky true stories, please help us out and subscribe. My final case nearly broke me. Syracuse University's Thorndon Park seemed simple at first. Strange lights near the water tower, electronic equipment malfunctions, students feeling followed, standard haunting signs. Nothing I hadn't handled before. I was wrong, so terribly wrong. The first sign came when I tried to photograph the water tower. Every picture was corrupted, not just blurry or dark, but twisted, showing impossible angles and shapes in the background. In some, you could make out faces in the tower's windows, dozens of them, all watching. Students had reported feeling followed, so I set up motion sensors and cameras around the park. The first night, every single one failed simultaneously. But before they died, they caught something. In every frame, shadows moved between the trees, not random shapes, but distinct figures, all walking in perfect. The second night, I heard the screams. Not echoes, not recordings, clear, present, terrified screams coming from the tower. I ran toward them, but the closer I got, the further away they seemed. Then I realized I was being led. The trail of screams took me to an old maintenance tunnel near the tower's base. Inside, the walls were covered in handprints, hundreds of them, at all heights, some so old they'd merged with the concrete. As I photographed them, my camera's screen showed something the naked eye couldn't see. Each handprint was glowing, pulsing in rhythm like heartbeats. That's when the whispers started. Not in my ears, but in my head. Dozens of voices speaking in unison. We see, we watch, we wait. My flashlight died. In the darkness, the handprints began to glow with a pale blue light. They were moving, reaching out from the wall. I ran, but in the darkness, I hit a dead end, a wall that hadn't been there before. The whispers grew louder. Join us, watch with us, stay with us. My phone screen lit up, showing dozens of text messages arriving simultaneously. Each one was the same. Look behind you. I turned. In the phone's dim light, I saw them, transparent figures filling the tunnel. Students, professors, visitors, all from different eras, all with the same empty, watching eyes. They reached for me with glowing hands. I closed my eyes and ran straight through them. The sensation was like plunging into ice water. When I finally made it out of the tunnel, I checked my phone. The screen showed my camera roll opening by itself, displaying every photo I'd ever taken at haunted locations. In each one, in the background, the same figures were visible, watching, waiting. The truth about Thorndon Park is darker than any standard haunting. It's not just a place where spirits linger. It's a place where they gather, where they watch, where they collect. Every person who feels followed there, they are being followed. Every camera that malfunctions, it's working perfectly, showing things our minds can't process. The watchers of Thorndon are still there, still watching, still waiting. And now they watch me too. Sometimes in the reflection of my computer screen or a store window, I see them. Those empty eyes, those reaching hands. And every photo I take, no matter where I am, shows them in the background. Watching. Always watching. These 3 cases changed me. Changed how I see the world. The students at Kenyon College learned that some tragedies leave permanent scars on reality. Notre Dame taught me that some secrets refuse to stay hidden, no matter how long ago they were buried. And Syracuse showed me that sometimes the paranormal isn't just observing us. Sometimes it wants to make us part of its eternal audience. I still investigate hauntings. I have to, because now I know. These aren't just stories. They're warnings, and someone needs to tell them before more people join the watchers in the dark. Sleep well tonight. But remember, if you feel watched on your campus, if you hear footsteps above you, if shadows move in ways they shouldn't, you're not imagining it. You're just finally seeing what's always been there.